And our next panelist is Professor Séverine Autesserre, and she's an assistant professor of political science, specializing in international relations and African studies at Barnard College of Columbia University. And she works on civil wars, peace building, peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, and African politics. And her latest book is Peaceland, Conflict Resolution at the Everyday Politics of International Intervention. Examines how everyday practices, habits, and narratives influence peace-building interventions on the ground. She is also the author of award-winning book, The Trouble with the Congo, Local Violence and Failure of International Peace-Building, which focuses on local violence and international intervention in the eastern part of DRC. Before coming to academia, she worked for humanitarian and development agencies in Afghanistan, Kosovo, DRC, Nicaragua, and India. Professor, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kirbaksov. Can you hear me, everybody? Yeah, great, fantastic. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's really an honor and a pleasure. As Mr. Kirbaksov was saying, most of my research for the past 15 years has focused on peace building in various conflict zones, notably in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There are massive international efforts to help the Congo build peace and promote sustainable development, but violence continues at a very high level. And as a result, the Congolese conflicts remains one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II. Development programs in the violent eastern provinces are either non-existent or ineffective. And therefore, the Congo consistently ranks either last or second to last on the Human Development Index. And it continues to be the stage of the largest ongoing humanitarian crisis in the world. So my book, The Trouble with the Congo, looks at the question of why the massive international efforts have failed to help the Congo build lasting peace and security, and thus create the preconditions for sustainable development. My answer to this question revolves around two central findings. First, violence has continued in the Congo since the war officially ended, in a large part because of the persistence of local conflicts which remain unaddressed. And when I say local, I really mean at the level of the individual, the family, the clan, the municipality, the community, the district, sometimes the ethnic group. Second, when we try to understand why there has been so little work done on grassroots conflict resolution, we see that a dominant peace-building culture shaped the international intervention in a way that precluded action on local violence, and that ultimately doomed the international efforts. Western and African diplomats, United Nations peacekeepers, and the staff of most non-governmental organizations involved in conflict resolution share a set of ideologies, rules, rituals, assumptions, definitions, standard operating procedures. This common culture influences the interveners' understandings of the causes of violence, the path toward peace, and the roles of foreign actors. It enables international peace builders to ignore the micro-level tensions that often jeopardize the macro-level settlements. In the Congo, the presence of this peace-building culture explains why the massive international peace-building efforts have only rarely targeted local conflict, and therefore why the international intervention has failed to help the Congo build a sustainable peace and promote sustainable development. So I'll take a few minutes to elaborate on the Congo, and then I will show you how this analysis applies to other conflict situations. Most analysts and policymakers understand the continuing violence in the Congo as a top-down problem, meaning as the consequence of national and international tensions. Tensions, for instance, between President Kabila and various other national leaders. and tensions between the Congo, Rwanda, Uganda, and between these states and their respective rebel groups. The top-down understanding of violence, along with a number of other elements that I document in my book, constructs intervention at the national and international level as the only natural and legitimate task for UN staff and diplomats. Most UN diplomatic and NGO staff members focus their efforts on addressing national and international sources of tensions, and they approach these tensions in a top-down fashion, meaning by working with national and international elite, and by designing and implementing macro-level projects. The problem with this approach is that in the Congo, now, just as during the past 20 years, continuing violence is motivated not only by international and national causes, but also by long-standing bottom-up agendas, whose main instigators are villagers, traditional chiefs, community chiefs, or ethnic leaders. Many conflicts revolve around political, social, and economic stakes that are distinctively local. For example, there is a lot of competition at the village or district level over who will be chief of village or chief of the territory according to traditional law, who can control the distribution of land and the exploitation of local mining sites, and who can be appointed to local administrative positions. This competition hampers sustainable development. It also often results in localized fighting, and quite frequently it escalates into generalized fighting. So a lot of the violence in the Congo is not coordinated on a large scale, but it is rather the product of fragmented, micro-level militias that each try to advance their own agenda at the village or district level. And we can wonder why, in these circumstances, foreign actors have neglected to help implement local peace-building programs. And in my research, I found that diplomats and United Nations staff members considered local conflict resolution as an important, unfamiliar, and unmanageable task. The very idea of becoming involved at the local level clashed so fundamentally with existing cultural norms, and it so threatened key organizational interests that neither resistance nor external shocks could convince international actors that they should reevaluate their understanding of violence and intervention. I also show in my book that this analysis helps better understand many cases of international intervention success and failure in Africa and elsewhere. Local conflicts are often critically important in sustaining violence and hindering development in war and post-war environment, from Darfur to Afghanistan and Iraq to Timor-Leste, or even land conflict in El Salvador. And in the rare cases where there have been comprehensive bottom-up peace-building initiatives, these initiatives have been successful in making peace sustainable and in promoting durable development. One of the best examples is the contrast between the relatively peaceful situation in Somaliland, which benefited from sustained grassroots peace-building initiatives, with the violence prevalent in the rest of Somalia, where peace-building was mostly top-down. However, I also show in the book that the international peace-building culture regularly preclude international action in support of bottom-up peace-building. For example, the dominant peace-building culture usually shapes the international understanding of violence in a top-down manner, as it did in the Congo. UN officials, diplomats, the staff of most non-governmental organizations usually interpret continued fighting and massacres in places like Darfur, Kenya, the former Yugoslavia, as a top-down problem, meaning as the consequence of national and international tensions. And these international peace builders usually view local conflict as the result of insufficient state authority and of various populations' so-called inherent propensity to barbarism and to violence. The dominant peace-building culture also usually shapes the international actors' understandings of their roles as focused on the national and international levels, and in particular on the organization of general elections, while diplomats and UN staff members consider local conflict resolution as, again, an unimportant, unfamiliar, and unmanageable task. And I show in the book that this analysis helps better understand the international peace-building strategies and the challenges that these strategies face in places like Afghanistan, Bosnia, Liberia, Haiti, Iraq, and Kosovo. Based on this analysis, my main policy fix or policy recommendation is that if we want to build peace and promote sustainable development in conflict zones, in addition to any top-down intervention, conflict must be resolved from the bottom up. Again, my argument is not that national and international conflicts don't matter, and that national and international peace building is unnecessary. Instead, my argument is that both macro-level and micro-level peace building is necessary to make peace sustainable. And of course, local NGOs, local authorities, and civil society representatives should be the main actors in the bottom-up process. But there are obstacles. Local actors often lack the funding, the logistical means, and sometimes the technical capacity to implement effective local peace-building programs. So international donors should expand their funding for local conflict resolutions. And international agencies such as the United Nations should create new departments, new standard operating procedures, and new funding and operating patterns to better support local peace-building actors. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. This is you brought up very fundamental issue of bottom-up approach for development and peace building, and our approach as a Journalism Rights Foundation and the network of civil society, we're very focusing on that approach, and also we of course do not underestimate the importance of the bottom-up and the resources. And what's important is that proper allocation of resources to all the stakeholders at the local level, community level, or the national level. That's the important. And actually, United Nations, I have been witnessing that more civil societies are engaged with the United Nations, and they bring their agendas here, and they even in the open working groups meetings. This is the 8th session and the last. In the morning, the co-chairs of the open working group discuss issues only with the civil society organizations. So they have specific timing to hear the voices of the underrepresented people community, and actually and of course there are resource limitations for those underrepresented communities, localities to bring up their agendas to international level. And that's why, as a Journalism Rights Foundation, we're organizing a Istanbul summit in May 2014, this year in Istanbul, which will bring from 140 countries civil societies there and to speak on the development agenda of the UN. So it will be more or less, we'll have their opinions, expressions, and concerns, and we'll bring all those expressions to the UN.